Hello, hello, hello. Thank you everyone for signing up, and thank you Alpan obviously for facilitating this conversation and preparing a very awesome keynote. While we wait for people to trickle in, maybe an easy question for you, Alpan, to start. What's a book that you have recommended most to people?
Um, More recent books, I think The Covenant of Water. It's a really long book, but it's a great book. And it's written by a physician, but it touches on medicine, but it's not really related to medicine. It's a great book. I highly recommend it.
Is it
Nice.
nonfiction?
What?
Yeah, it is fiction. It's in my stack of books here, very near and dear to my heart. So it's like in the first stack in the books I liked.
Nice. Thomas, have you read any good books recently?
The older I get, the more difficult it becomes to find books that touch me as much as the books I read when I was younger. So, but I'm on an eternal quest, constantly reading. So, yeah, I
I
think
was uh,
the book I've been recommending most lately is The Price We Pay, because Marty
oh, yeah, it's a
McRae
good one.
now is part of the administration. So I think everybody should read it to understand what kind of person is in there. So I think it's pretty exciting.
Yep, that's cool. I'm reading the one from did you know that he has a new book? Also a good one. Essentially, the message is stop wasting your talent building like influencer marketing bullshit software and instead go solve very big societal problems like healthcare, which might be like a very good introduction to today's keynote as well.
And read
Before,
fiction. Fiction allows you
yep,
to be imaginative and creative. So stop reading um, how-to books to find a solution. Sometimes you need to think harder to find a solution in healthcare.
very true, very true. Very good introduction also to this today's keynote. Maybe before Alpon, we give you the stage, Thomas. Can you briefly introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, sure. Thomas, co-founder and CEO of AWell and also co-author at CareOps. Great to see you all.
Great. And so I'm obviously Rick, RN by training, also co-author of CareOps, was at AWell for a very long time, and then I made the switch to Sort Health, where I'm now building AI products for care management. And with us today is Alpan. Alpan is the data scientist at Thyme Care. You've been there now for 4 years, I think. And before that, you were the engineering team lead at Galileo, which is a very under the surface, but very successful health tech startup from or company now from New York. And before that, you were also at Flatiron for 4 years as well. So very, very impressive background, and honored to have you today to talk about data in healthcare care ops. The stage is yours.
Great. Thank you for the introduction. And I'm excited to be here. Rick and I have been talking about this presentation for 4 months now. It's finally here. Rick, I apologize for keep rescheduling due to medical issues in my family. But today we are going to talk about the data is like abundantly available. We all want to use it to make smarter decisions, but it's at the point where it's so abundantly available and easy to access that it turns into um, almost like creating this like problem of noise to information ratio where there's a lot of data, but getting to the insights is very, very hard. And we are going to talk about how we can basically like find the right balance. There's not a right answer, but try to find the right balance to go from data into like driving insights to make care models better at um, healthcare companies, healthcare tech companies. And I think my talk is like divided into two. One is more traditional data analytics and how can we get at Thyme Care, we always talk about how can we deliver care at the right dose and at the right time. And we are going to talk about how can we actually deliver insights at the right dose and at the right time. And then maybe we are going to go to the how can we go beyond the traditional data analytics to get even smarter and deeper into the data. And I'm going to talk for 25 minutes, and then Rick and Thomas are going to interrupt me very politely so that we can have a Q&A session after that. This is like how I think about my care rather than like companies. I basically have been in the healthcare space for almost 11 years now, worked at 3 great companies with like great founders who were very strong operators and very, very smart people. So I don't have a background in data science. I used to be a fixed income trader, then went into data science and learned about oncology, primary care, and clinical care models by working and doing this. And I'd like think about my career as like a pendulum career where I've been an individual contributor, I've been manager of teams, I swing between data science and engineering, so which allows me to get my hands dirty and learn across the board and be useful to patients at the end of the day. This is my obligatory slide to introduce Thyme Care to you. Thyme Care is a little over 4 years old right now, and we mostly work with different risk-bearing entities, ranging from payers to big PCP groups to bigger oncology practices, and we basically try to reduce the cost of care and improve the quality of care. And on the right, you can see, or my right, you can see like a map of different oncology practices we work with across the US. And the bottom line here is we work with a wide range of risk-bearing entities and a wide network of oncology practices and PCP groups, which is a daunting task to scale and organize the data, but it's also amazing that we can learn from one partner, synthesize it, and then almost like disseminate to the entire network and different partners, so everyone gets to learn from each other. Well, if you're attending this talk, you already buy into the like philosophy or care of, right? Like we want to start with a well-defined guidelines or a care model. We want to design it, we want to build it, operate it, and then like monitor and improve and continue in this cycle. I buy into this, but this like visual seems very sterile, right? It's like engineering, physical sciences, and it almost implies that you're going to hire some really smart MDs, MBAs, and they're going to get into a room and hypothesize all day, and they will come up with like a really clean care model, and then everything will be rosy, and you will be have great success and efficacy in your interventions. But the reality is very different for people on this call, right? I almost compare it to gardening, where you need to get on your knees and get your hands dirty, and it will be a little messy, and that's part of the game, where you start with one contract and all your attention goes to that contract because that's the only customer you have, and you are going to like make sure that that customer grows and doesn't fail. Then while you're like attending this one little customer, then your care or your growth team is naturally going to go out there and sell every contract they can sell. There's no point in telling the growth team not to sell anything because that's their nature and that's what they're incentivized to do. But slowly it turns into you have a range of customers, range of contract structures, and you've been throwing different interventions into the care model to see what works, and it becomes a little unruly. And the goal is, I don't know if anyone gets to this stage, but you want to have like a groomed care model and a groomed company structure where you're delivering value rather than throwing different interventions at the problem to see what sticks at the end of the day. And we are going to basically see how data can help in that transition from going like one contract to maybe like what I call that the more traditional data insights, to go to the make sure that you're growing and your company gets is successful to survive. And then how can you go from the growth stage, which is daunting and overwhelming for everyone, to like a state where it seems like more like a Zen garden, and hopefully you have money at the end of the day to buy fish and have a koi pond, basically. And I talk really fast, so Rick, tell me to slow down if I need to. I think one part of the problem usually is you build dashboards and data analytic insights, but there's no like enforcement mechanism of it to make it useful. So at Thyme Care, we actually started by asking the question, hey, like, what would be the right operating model or the cadence to look at data and try to gain insights? So this is almost like a sampled version of our operating model to say, one part of the operating structure is we want to enroll patients into our program, and the other, like one key intervention in our core model is reduction of acute care utilization. And under that, we basically have different flavors of that, like how can we avoid the index in the acute care events, then how can we like intervene after the event happened to prevent a readmission, or people who are like approaching at the end of life, how can we think about them differently? And the cadence here is like we design our data infrastructure and operating model such that at the most in the trenches workflows, the data is being used every day, every hour. People are looking at dashboards to understand things, and clearly this leads to questions. And then we have a weekly cycle of review and Q&A where one data scientist was almost like a embedded consultant into the intervention group, that the team can ask questions, they can look at the data and try to make sense of it. And then at the end of the day, there's like a monthly cycle, which is more of like an executive cycle to, let's take a step back and across all these interventions, look at the data to see where we may want to deploy more resources, resize our bets, or try to like allocate resources from one intervention to another because it may be less urgent, or we basically say, hey, this intervention seems to be doing well. Can we like reduce the delivery of the dose of the intervention and allocate resources to something else?
Maybe
Alphan,
quick question. Oh,
Oh, yeah,
yeah,
go
go
ahead.
ahead, Thomas. Uh, so maybe a question on my side. So you mentioned the weekly cycle, and so let's say that I'm a nurse, and so I work at Thyme. Is it then you are like in an office hour, and I can just jump in and I can say, hey, Alphan, I've seen an increase in readmissions in this state. Can you validate this a bit more? Is it like this, or how does that work practically?
Yeah, no, good question. I think some of the questions are addressed by Slack, or like there's like an accumulation of questions that are coming through Slack or Jira, or Linear. We use Linear, but I think in this case, it's either like it's an easy question, someone put it onto the agenda and you quickly answer it and move on to the next topic. Or sometimes it's, I called it the discipline thought partnership. So the reason these meetings exist is not to like force someone to use the data analytics. It's more, I looked at the data and I want to talk through it with someone. So this is like a carved out time every week, like a 45-minute block where nurses, doctors, and data scientists come together to like understand the what's going on behind the data. I think having that carved time on the calendars is useful to enforce like discipline and allocating time basically when everyone is in the trenches all day long. Thomas, did you have a question too?
Yeah, sure. So you mentioned sampled. So I'm assuming that there's in the real model there's more purple and more blue boxes.
Yeah,
Is this
so
what you mean with sampled? Yeah.
yeah, so all the like purplish colors are like what we call the higher level intervention group. So there are things that we do around cost of drugs and where people are being treated and all that stuff. So there are like many, let's say there are 2 or 3 more purple ones, and each one have subgroups to say within that group, like maybe geographic splits or the different sub flavors of the intervention group underneath them.
Okay, and there was a quick question from the audience. Where are the data scientists involved also in the monthly reviews?
Yes, I mean, so there's like some kind of a hierarchy where like the head of the clinical team is in that, or the operational team in that, and then depending on the for different months, there is a standard review of the metrics, and then we can say, hey, let's do a spotlight or deep dive into the end of life interventions. Then we can bring the data scientist who's working on end of life, or the operations lead who works on end of life. So there's a regular attendees every month, and then there may be like spotlight attendees depending on what we want to dive into.
Thanks.
And then if we move forward, there's like one layer that's missing here. We do a lot of work actually to ingest data from different data sources and model data at the member level. Today's talk is more about like how can we go from members to cohorts and the populations. And this is like, I always say, executives want to see, tell me 2, 3 metrics which are going to tell me how the business is doing, but it's like actually more complicated. So you kind of need to peel the onion a little bit. And this is like what I'm presenting here is almost mapping to the operating model hierarchy, almost in the reverse order, where the day-to-day team may be looking at these like effectiveness and throughput metrics every day to understand, hey, can we identify the members on time? Did we attempt to deliver the intervention? Did the member receive the intervention? And is there variation across population and team members in terms of the performance? So these are dashboards that we build that people managers or the intervention leads may be looking at every day. And then basically going from that, it basically tells you, is Thyme Care doing its job well in a timely manner, and what are the potential blockers for that? And then the next set of metrics we created are kind of like corollary to the outcomes we want to track, because one problem in healthcare, Rick was already mentioning this on the weekend to me, is like every claim data is the ultimate metric everyone is measured on when it comes to financial performance, but claims data is always lag, so you're always like looking back in the mirror 2-3 months when it comes to claims. So we created these almost proxy metrics to say, hey, how is it our enrollment to manage the risk of this population? Can we look at admission discharge fees rather than claims to have like a more real-time view of the acute care utilization, or we may be looking at drug orders or other like order sets to almost have a pre-read of the outcomes we want to drive. And ultimately, this all goes back to, like, as I was saying, ultimately everyone settles, or your contracts settle on the claims data. So we basically almost reproduce everything else, everything from the second step using claims data. And you need to kind of say, hey, this is what I predicted using my leading indicators. And now when the claims data comes in, did I actually drive the financial performance I wanted to drive? And that was more like hypothetical at a high level how we do it. But like if I actually want to tell you, hey, rather than me telling you that this exists, this actually exists. This is not an endorsement for Looker, but like you can see the enrollment like folder in our Looker dashboards, and you will see there's like an operating group dashboard there, which includes the metrics I'm showing you here. And there are more like team specific performance metrics for the people managers to like address on their team to understand how individual teams or pods may be performing, or within those pods how individual members may be performing. And again, as I said, the operational dashboard like matches the narrative I was describing to you, where it starts with the identification rate to see, can we even identify the people in a timely manner to enroll in our population? Did we pick up the phone or send them an SMS message to even attempt to enroll them? And were we able to reach them? And then at the end of the day, if you were able to reach them, did you convert them into your population? So we try to approach it as a funnel here. And then within the like team performance metrics, we again look at different dimensions to say, hey, are the people doing enough outreaches? Are they completing their task at the pace we desire to be able to drive the metrics we are interested in? And then again, let's take another intervention. The point I'm trying to make here is like we actually are very opinionated on the structure of these dashboards, and we try to make them consistent across the board. And this makes the whole hierarchy and the roll-ups easier, right? So if you're like clicking through as an executive or someone like me I want to understand enrollment transitions of care, when I open the dashboard, they kind of like read in the same way in the same narrative, so that me understanding the dashboard, the time to understanding from opening the dashboard is as low as possible. And there are some nuances where some metrics are similar, which is like identification, outreach, reach, to say like, did we identify a member who had an admission discharge event? Did we outreach to them afterwards? Did we reach them? And then once we reach them, were there like some subtasks that we want to do? We can even drill into the like subtask in the workflow to understand the behavior there.
So Alphan, all of these metrics that you mentioned can have, thresholds or target values. Can you talk a bit about those and how you set them?
That's correct. That's a good question. So that's actually, I was going from like the bottom of the hierarchy to the top of the hierarchy slowly. But as you can imagine, there's like some, if I go back here, we basically have some opinion on, hey, what are the utilization metrics or the enrollment rates you need to hit to drive like the financial outcomes you want to drive. So for per each contract, for each intervention, we have different thresholds to say, this is the target that we are aiming for. Are we like close to it, far from it? And that basically derives the resourcing conversations in the team. I think this is more like a visual. Since we are in healthcare, the pain in the butt is not, I cannot show you real data because everyone is going to kill me if I leak PHI here, but this is more to show you, we are pretty opinionated about the content of the dashboard as a data team. We even tell the user, this is how you should be using this. And then the filters at the top look the same. So this is almost to say, the advantage of having embedded data sciences in the team, they understand the thresholds, goals, but also the workflows of the team, so that they can create the dashboard to say, hey, like, I know how you are thinking about the data and how you want to use it, and I'm going to structure in a way that it's useful for you, so you don't have to like open up a Looker and try to customize it on your own. And one thing I wanted to highlight here is, this is like where we have monthly KPIs, we have weekly KPIs. And then the next question turns into, hey, I know I'm lagging behind my target for this metric. Who are the patients or the tasks that I need to review to improve my target or get back on track? And we call them Blitz campaign lists. I think Julia Friedman on our team, one of the MDs named this, which basically tells us, hey, I want to look at the outstanding incomplete events or patients who need to be attended. And this basically allows the team to go from metrics to individual members or the task to like really improve their workflows or understand what was happening under the hood there.
Maybe quick question on the previous slide. So Sherry in the audience asked, no, the next one, sorry. So Sherry in the audience asked, like, how are you freeing the data from the dashboards, notifications and alerts, question mark. So if I read this slide correctly, it's like twofold. Like one, looking at dashboards is not per se something bad. You need to just make sure that people look it in the right way. So that's how you try to solve it with like how to use these dashboards. And then second, I think the Blitz campaign list is how you make the data a little bit more actionable. Do you think that's correct, or is there anything missing in that answer?
No, I think this is like what's really missing in this presentation is this is why I was telling you like maybe there's a follow-up to this presentation. We actually have a bunch of internal applications where we ingest the data and then we auto-trigger these tasks. So like when a admission discharge feed comes to us, actually we automatically create a workflow for the patient to be reviewed and called or reviewed by the care team. I think the Blitz campaign here is the tasks were created. For some reason they're accumulating. I want to get to the list where, hey, I want to see tasks that have been outstanding for 30 days and which team owns them so that we can actually go review these patients and understand what went wrong in the application or what has been accumulated. Otherwise, like if everything goes well in the application and if every task is closed on time, the Blitz list is empty because the tasks are created in the application. Someone looks at the application, understands the member individual data in the application. Blitz campaign is almost like there will always be deviation from the desired outcome. This is almost how can we salvage the bad behavior and get back on track. That's how I think about the Blitz campaigns.
Yep, that makes sense. I think when I was at AWL, we had the saying like data flow equals care flow. So I think that's exactly what you're saying, right? So you have a data flow and then essentially it should automatically trigger workflows using technology, stuff like AWL or something else. Yep,
yeah, I
makes
think
sense.
yes, I think that we actually intentionally do not have in member level data or like task list in Looker as much as possible because they should all be done in the application. They should be auto-generated. Looker is almost like a stopgap to say, hey, you deviated from your regular workflows or regular bandwidth, or there is something wrong where things are going wrong. This is to come in and let's get back on track as quickly as possible and go back to using the application as quickly as possible. That's the idea there.
Makes total sense. Thank you.
And then the next section is like, as I said, these are more traditional data analysis. I think the goal there is like understand workflows or clinical workflows, embed data scientists into the process so they can build curated, opinionated dashboards that they are easy to use and create this like hierarchy of metrics in your organization to enforce their usage. I think the next point is the next section is more extra credit points for organizations to going from like understanding how they are performing to why they are performing in a certain way or how can they improve their performance. And one part of our process is actually what we call the fail point analysis, and this is almost a bridge between the operational activities into the outcomes to say if you take the like example I have here, which is like you identify all the admission discharge events in a timely manner. Your team is doing a great job of outreaching and reaching the patients to intervene after the event to prevent a readmission. You completed medical adherence task. You coordinated with the PCPs, yet you see the patient still ended up in the hospital like within 30 days as an unplanned readmission. So then we asked the question, we did everything possible in the way we intended. Why are we still like why is the patient still ending up in the hospital? And those are interesting questions to understand the gaps in the processes and the workflows. And if the patient is like on an oxygen tank and someone is cutting off their electricity and they go to the hospital because someone cut their electricity, you may say, hey, like there's nothing I can do about that. Or if they're going back to the hospital because their PCP did not let's say, address the issue in the appropriate way, then there's like a thing. What we can do is like either we step in instead of the PCP in a stronger way, or we can go back to the PCP groups and coordinate better care for the patient in that case. And I think I like got through this a little bit. And one part of the equation is like having those weekly meetings as a cross-functional team. What it allows is to say, hey, let's understand what went wrong. If it's like a SOP or playbook issue, the operations team can handle it. Or if it's a training issue, the people manager should address it. Or we basically realize, hey, we see the index event and we intervene about the index event, but we did it so late that we couldn't even prevent the second readmission. So then it turns into, hey, data team, go figure out how we can ingest the data in a more timely manner, or like make it visible to the end user in a more timely manner. So it allows us to understand which team or who is the best person to address the problem, so that we can keep building our care model or build our technology stack together to make it as good as possible. And then this is like a busy slide. We actually put the like fail point analysis into the regular dashboard, so the team can actually like pull up these events and review them on their own rather than coming to the data science team. And some of the questions that come up in these like weekly sessions they are meaty, but they're not super urgent. So they almost like percolate in the background to say, hey, like something doesn't look right, but we can't really understand it, or it becomes like from a operational day-to-day question to more philosophical question for the care model. Everyone agrees they're important, but when we are all like in the day-to-day flow of it, we may not address them immediately. But they, as I said, sometimes they sit in the background, percolate, and they go from 2 interesting questions to 5 interesting questions. That's when we say, hey, like let's pause and do a deep dive retrospective here. And the goal is not to like discover everything about the intervention. It's more to say, hey, there were like 6 or 7 meaty questions that came up. They all seem to be related to each other. There's clearly something to unhash here. It allows us to pause and rethink the intervention or go one layer deeper into the process. And this is like, I truly believe these like deep dives are helpful, because when you're in this like unruly stage, your care model is operating and working, and sometimes really people do not even understand how it works or what may be going wrong in the model, because there's like so many things to keep track of until you pause and take a step back in the process. And one example here is we basically build a enrollment queue, or like an enrollment related flow in our application. And Charlotte used to be a product manager. She now works even more closely with the care team. And the idea there was like, hey, we segmented our population, and our queue should work such that we should be doing outreaches to the high segment first. And then as we like complete outreaches to them, the medium cohort should come, and then the low should follow them like over time as we have more capacity on the team. And then the second part of this problem is that, hey, like that's great when you sign a new contract on day one, when you have 2,000 people or 5,000 people to call. But as you start calling people, then you're basically going to run into this problem where some people you're able to outreach but not able to reach, and some people you're like reaching multiple times and you're not like able to convert them. So there's almost like, rather than the outreach being the main problem, you start kind of like sensing that there are 3 different problems in the workflow. And we basically said, hey, let's take 2 days off, understand this behavior, and it basically turned into someone sitting down. And I'm a big fan of long form memos. I don't want to be an endorser of Jeff Bezos giving his latest political views, but long form memos are great, because someone actually needs to sit down and write full sentences and think about the problem deeply. And this is like one example where someone on our data team sat down and said, hey, why can't let's define our population into like 3 phenotypes to say people who are, there's like an outreach problem. We don't even like outreach to them sufficiently. There's a cohort of patients, we outreach to them multiple times, but we don't seem to be able to connect with them. And there's like a separate problem where we actually talk to the patient on the phone multiple times, but we still cannot convert them, even though they may be in the high segment and we think they have high needs. So like someone actually sat down and defined these and looked at the data and presented to the broader team. And the long memo is great, but then it turns into, we all thought these were like interesting and useful ways to look at the problem, then they become actually part of the standard dashboards and the metrics we present. So the cycle is, you start with the deep dive and it seems like an ad hoc analysis, but then you say, hey, like there was something here a smart data scientist discovered, and it's like a nice way to look at the data. Why don't we put it into the standard dashboard so it becomes readily available for the team so we don't have to like pause and rethink it afterwards. And then going back to like what I was saying before, Nate leads our operations team. And one part of this is like, there are so many things that he needs to pay attention every day. And when you're looking at your standard metrics, you maybe like put the horse blinders on and execute. And these deep dives sometimes allows us to pause and say, hey, like, is there a problem that is like in my blind spot that I need to address? And then the second thing, as I was saying, is since these conversations are cross-functional, you can say, hey, there may be like 3 different problems, and the way to solve these problems may be very different, where the increasing outreach is an enrollment specialist team problem, so they can be responsible and on the hook to solve that. So there's some accountability, clear accountability. We can say the problem of like calling people but not being able to talk to the people, maybe that's like a tech team marketing problem. Maybe they don't even recognize the Thyme Care number, or they don't even know who Thyme Care is. And then the second part, like the third part, maybe like a user research problem where you call the patient, we think they have high clinical needs, but they keep refusing to receive our services. So maybe like we can understand they are thinking, and that's maybe like a user research problem handled by the design and product teams. That was more enrollment specific, but like you can apply the same framework across the board. And going back to what I was saying about meaty questions around acute care utilization, like these are all the actual questions we came up on our team. And where this went to is actually, we hired Julia Friedman as a palliative care specialist. Now we have actually like more refined interventions are palliative care. And as we like look at the data and ask these questions, it allows us to look at the identification models we have, or like mortality prediction models we have, and refine the processes and the data processes and identification together. And maybe like she's way smarter and more eloquent than I am. So if I were to distill like, why do you need to deep dives and how do you go from like the unruly world to the groomed world? At some point, you basically get to the stage where you don't have to throw more intervention into your care model, because everyone agrees on the big value levers and which interventions need to be delivered. It turns into more refining, hey, how can you spend more of your time and attention and identify the patient in the right time so that your interventions become more effective by almost like targeting the population or sub-cohorts more clearly. And I think this is the end of my pontification to say, like, let's start with 1 tree and groom it. And then at some point, hopefully, if you get on your knees and get your hands dirty and set up the processes and the data infrastructure and use the data, hopefully we'll get to like the more well-groomed version of the care model. And I think I'm right on time, so I give myself brownie points there.
Alphan, I have a first question. It's actually 2 questions. So it's very clear there's a lot of sophistication to how all of this is set up, right? A lot of people in the audience are actually either smaller, earlier organizations, or much bigger organizations than Thyme Care, right? You're 4 years old. You're obviously growing. Mm-hmm. So the 2 questions are, what did this look like 2 years ago? What was in place and what was not yet in place? And the second question is, for organizations, 5x or 10x the size of Thyme Care, what do you anticipate breaking that you might need to proactively solve now in the setup?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the 2 years ago or earlier in the journey, I think where I was feeling the most passion was, we had a care team, but we didn't have a clearly defined care model. So it was basically like, hey, as a clinical team, you need to tell us like, what is your hypothesis and what change you want to drive. And now we call it like, we are in the 3rd iteration of our care model. So really, like, I think the biggest challenge is, everyone says like, let's look at the data, tell me the data, but you first tell me what you would like to do, and have an hypothesis on, these are the people I want to identify. I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, and this is the outcome I need to drive. I think that's like a really the key step before you even hire a single data scientist. As I said, I think the second step for us was, hey, let's hire people who can model the data at the member and event level so that it becomes useful to create the workflows. And then you can basically start saying, hey, now that we have the data modeled at the member and event level, how can we aggregate that? I think that becomes like easier if you have the foundational like member and event level data models set up, right? And maybe like this is a plug, but I think that's becoming easier and easier. There are companies who are like building standard data models under the hood. dbt is like a good pipelining tool where you can hire someone to like model data fairly easily right now. So the cost of curating the data is getting lower, but you still need to understand the care model or the philosophy of the care model to be able to ask the right questions. I always say like the hardest part is asking the right questions. I think you need to find the folks to ask the right questions all the time. Bigger organizations, yes, Thyme Care is no longer super tiny, but we are like less complicated than a big healthcare health system. I think for maybe like you can take the hierarchy I was presenting, and then you can establish in a bigger health system to like either break it down into different geographies or like practice locations or host different departments, but have like clear accountability at the different levels of the hierarchy. And then the hard part is like, can you give them the technical resources to be partners with them? I think that's like whole embedded data scientist it's expensive, but it pays off in understanding your care model and how quickly you can iterate and improve upon that.
And so data is one piece, but most or sometimes the biggest data gaps are not per se technical, like they're more hidden in like frontline workflows that you actually don't have any data on. So to you or like to Thyme, and based on like your experience at Galileo as well, like what's the fastest way to find out where clinicians are actually struggling, even if they're not like reporting on it?
Yeah. First, we encourage people to report things because like frontline work, I think there's like a lot of empathy between the data team and the care team. So that's like cross-functional work allows for that too. Like when pipelines break, they show empathy to us when we are like blocking their workflows, but we understand since they deliver the care to patients, they actually have the hardest job to get on the phone with someone who is like has cancer and maybe approaching end of life. So we encourage them to report their issues so that we can make their lives better, so that they can make the patients' lives better. But beyond that, I think we have our product team actually does like shadowing sessions. Sometimes like we basically say, hey, can we like follow? We look at the data and say this something looks funky here, and they may not be reporting it. And then we may actually say, hey, can we shadow you guys for a couple of days, and that may gain insights. Or as I said, we can say something looks fishy, let's do a deep dive. And when you look at the deep dive, like you can actually state the problem a little bit better when you start looking at the data better. And like one example is, if you want a more concrete example, going back to like admission discharge related stuff, like the availability of the data or the timeliness of the data differs a lot based on geography or your partnership. And it took us a while to understand like the quality of the data or the heterogeneity in the quality of the availability of the data across different partners and geographies. And it wasn't reported by the care team because they don't really get to see that. They just feel the pain of it. But doing a deep dive allowed us to understand that part.
Yep. That makes sense. We have 4 more minutes. Thomas, what last questions do you have? And thank you, by the way, for sharing all the wisdom, Alban.
Yeah, thanks, Alphan. To what extent do you get data from your partners, and how difficult is it to get that data into your ecosystem?
Yeah, I will try to be politically correct here. So we basically did a lot of work. Like I think, Rick, this is the part of the team having done this before. Like I think even when we had a first contract, we basically said, hey, at some point, everyone is going to send us data in a different shape and form. We should build our like canonical data model. So we actually, all of our RB partners send us data in a different shape and format, but we put them into our like same canonical models, and the downstream pipeline looks the same, so it allows us to like answer questions and model the data easier. I think we come a long way to say, hey, these are our suggested data dictionaries for the ingestion. So people tend to follow them, but then you have like this problem where some RBs may not even have the technical resources, so they just want to dump you the CSV in the rawest form as possible, and you need to do the hard work, and we will do the hard work. Or they may be a really big player and they say, I have my standard template and I will not deviate from that. So you kind of need to figure out how to juggle that as much as possible. And again, like this is not a plug for DBT, but like DBT allows us to do that pretty easily to say, like, let's ingest the data and transform the data into the shape we want to use it and in a uniform way across the different partnerships.
Yeah, and maybe related to this, so not all data comes in at the right time, right? But many of your, so you have your internal operating cycle of making decisions and the reviews. And so how do you then handle delays in incoming data?
Yeah.
For claims, for example. Yeah.
No. Great question. I think my biggest takeaway after doing this for 11 years is there's no single like complete and correct data source. You basically need to say, going back to the care model, like you need to say out of all the data you can extract out of it, what are the like key data points, like let's call it like the cancer diagnosis of the patient. Are they metastatic? What are their cancer medications? Maybe I'm making that up as I go. And then it turns into, hey, like claims will be always like, can I get CCDA documents from this data source? Can I ask the partner to send me the ADT feed, or can I do integrations with ADT partners, or is there a census file I can get from the partner? So it really turns into, you want to understand what are the high data points and then find multiple different data sources to piece the puzzle together in that case. And even like you will notice, like even the ADT data vendors, none of them are going to be complete depending on who's submitting data to the HIE. CCDA data, it's the same way, like depends on the willingness of the people to consent to their data being shared or the institution sharing the data. So you will never have 100% and 100 complete and timely data. It's just like being able to digest data from the different sources and, as I was saying, like model it into the core canonical model to say, there's a lineage and the source of the data, but what it really means is this patient got admitted to the hospital. That's what I care about. Being able to do that across different sources is the key part.
Okay, very good. We're at the end of our time. Alphan, big thanks for your wisdom and insights. I found this very, very valuable. To the audience, thank you for joining, Rick, for the efforts for setting this up. We also just published the CareOpsCon landing page that has a lot of videos on, how CareOpsCon was. I'm just pasting this in the chat. Rick will probably also mention this in a newsletter that's going out with the recording. And so if you weren't able to join CareOpsCon and you want to understand what the vibe was in the sessions, feel free to have a look. And there's definitely going to be a CareOpsCon 2026. So you can already pre-register there or pre-apply.
Well, thank you for having me here. And quick plug, I am fairly delinquent, but I also write on Substack. So if you want to hear more of my rants about HIPAA, data availability, semantics of data, different tooling, follow me on Substack, I guess.
Sounds good.
So,
Awesome.
bye,
Thank you. Bye-bye.